Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Scientists in Action Studying Sue the T-Rex. My name is Talia. I'm part of the Virtual Experiences team here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I am so excited to get to be your host and moderator for this exciting program today. We're going to give you a little look behind the scenes of the museum, as well as a look back in time at the world of Sue the Tyrannosaurus Rex, one of the most famous fossils ever found. I'm hanging out in one corner of the museum today, and in another part of the building down in our paleontology collection, we have two of our paleontologists, two experts today at the ready to tell you a little bit about what the big deal is with Sue. Why is Sue such a famous and important fossil to paleontology? And to tell you a little bit about the world that Sue lived in. So it's a virtual field trip back in time today, and we are so excited that all of you have decided to join us. We are going to get underway in just a moment. I'll hand it over to our two experts, but just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Number one, I'd like to begin today by respectfully acknowledging that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science is on the traditional lands of the Cheyenne, Ute, Arapaho, and Oceti-Sakowin nations, as well as other traditional keepers. I would also like to acknowledge that we are currently connected to students from all across the United States today. We are connected mostly to Colorado schools today, but we also have Texas and Nebraska on with us, and I'm peeking at my list. Looks like maybe an Alaska school or two might be joining us today. So we are so excited to have you all on. We hope that you're ready to ask some questions, because we will have a chance just a few minutes into the program to answer the questions that you would like to know the answer to. If you are one of those on-camera groups, please stay muted until we call on you. I will let you know when it is your turn to ask a question, and when that time comes, I will handle spotlighting your video feed so that everybody can see you. You might need to unmute on your end, and students, make sure you come right up to that microphone and use a nice, loud, and clear voice to ask your question. If you do not have the ability to turn your camera or microphone on today, that means that you are an off-camera participant. And that just means that we can't see you or hear you, but you're still going to be able to interact with us today. In just a few minutes, I will open up the Zoom chat, and you will have the ability to type in a question that you'd like us to answer. Please note, though, we probably won't get to your questions until a little bit later in the program. And it's really important that you use that chat only for those questions. If you're putting things in the chat like hi, or just typing gibberish and spamming things, it's really hard for me to watch the chat and pay attention to find the questions that you want answered. So do me a favor and make sure that I can get through as many questions as possible today by just keeping that chat free and calm for everybody. Okay, so if we're seeing too many questions being repeated, if we're seeing lots and lots of different questions be typed in the chat multiple times or spammed, we may have to hit the pause button for a few moments. So that is what I ask of you today. Use that chat only for those questions, and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. Without any further ado, I would love to invite our two experts, Dr. Tyler Leeson and Dr. Ian Miller, to go ahead and turn on their videos, and I will get you added into our gallery of people here. You can give everybody a little wave. Tyler Leeson is a curator of vertebrate paleontology here at the museum, and Ian Miller is a curator of paleobotany. So those are some big words, and they have a lot to tell you. We're going to hand it over to Tyler, which means that Ian and I are going to disappear for the first few minutes. Tyler, tell us a little bit about just what is the big deal with Sue? Why is this fossil so famous, so important? What do we need to know?
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm thrilled to be able to tell you about Sue, the mighty Tyrannosaurus Rex. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with T-Rex. It's one of the most famous dinosaurs because it represents one of the biggest land predators that ever lived in Earth's history. And Sue, the specimen Sue, the T-Rex, is one of the, or might even be, it's arguably the biggest T-Rex skeleton that's ever been found. She is just a remarkable specimen. You can see the skeleton there on the screen. When she's 13 feet tall at the hips, she's 40 feet long. And when she was alive 67 million years ago, she would have weighed nearly 7 tons. So just an incredibly large animal. And so Sue, you know, where does that name come from? Well, the name comes from the finder of this particular specimen. That's Sue Hendrickson. Sue Hendrickson was or is a fossil enthusiast, and she was looking for fossils in the Badlands of South Dakota in 1990. So here you can see what some of these Badlands look like. And she made the discovery of a lifetime. She came across the thigh bone and some spinal bones of Sue. And over the course of 2 weeks, they came back to that same spot and excavated the skeleton of Sue. And they found over 250 bones of Sue's body. This makes it roughly 90% complete. And it makes it by far the most complete T-Rex skeleton that's ever been found. So Sue is the biggest T-Rex, one of the, right up there, arguably the biggest T-Rex, and it's by far the most complete one that's ever been found. And it was found in 1990, and then over the course of many years, it took 30,000 hours for fossil or for scientists to extract the skeleton from the rocks. So using little tiny air scribes and other tools, they had to clean Sue's skeleton, which took 30,000 hours, which is the equivalent of one person working full time for 15 years. But truly worth it. And, because in 2000, Sue made her debut, the big opening of the Sue exhibit at the Field Museum. And so there you can see what Sue looks like today. And just again, a super complete specimen. And there's a lot that we've learned from Sue, the skeleton Sue. Sue preserved the ear bones. So, the ear bones are really small and they're really hard to preserve. And this is the first time that we've ever had the ear bones of T-Rex preserved. And it indicated that T-Rex had a very acute or a very good sense of hearing. And you can see the skull there, the eyes are pointing forward. And that indicates, just like with our eyes, which are pointing forward rather than on the side, it indicates that Sue had a very good depth perception. So Sue had a very good hearing, pretty good eyesight. And then they were able to CT scan the brain of Sue, and they were to figure out how big of brain it had. Turns out the brain was really, really, really small. So it wasn't thinking too deep of thoughts, but the olfactory bulbs, which is the organ for sense of smell, was really big. So it indicated that Sue had a really good sense of smell. So, which I think is just really, really cool. Another thing that we were able to figure out with Sue is that we were able to look at the thigh bone, your femur, your thigh bone, and look at it in cross section. So take that bone and cut it in half. And much like the tree rings, right? If you take a tree and cut it down, you can see the concentric rings of the tree. And that gives you an idea of how old that tree was when it was cut down. Same thing with dinosaurs and same thing with Sue. You can count those rings. And by doing so, scientists were able to determine that Sue was 28 years old when she died, which is quite old. That is quite old. And it seems to be the upper limit for T-Rex skeletons. They were thought to be able to live to be in their late 20s or maybe early 30s. And then another thing, of course, and this is something we know, but just something that's really impressive, is that Sue had dozens of these banana-sized teeth. So here I have a tooth that I found in Montana, and Sue has dozens of these in her mouth. And you can see they're really big. Some are even, get up to be about a foot long, so even bigger than this. And if you look really closely, you might be able to see that on the edge of the tooth, there's a bunch of little denticles or serrations. So, much like a steak knife. So steak knives have these little serrations and they're used for cutting meat. And there's no doubt that with teeth like this and having so many teeth like this, and with the serrations, that this animal was eating meat and eating a lot of it. At nearly 7 tons, it had to eat a lot of meat in order to sustain that much body mass. And so here you can see a nice image of how big Sue was when she was alive 67 million years ago. But one of the questions that scientists had debated for a long time was, how did Sue get the meat? Was Sue an active hunter, chasing down Triceratops? So you can see behind me, here's a nice Triceratops skull. Was she running these things down and duck-billed dinosaurs and like actively hunting? Or was she a scavenger? Was Sue just sort of chasing away other animals that had made a kill and then eating their food? And so there was this debate going back and forth, hunter, scavenger, hunter, scavenger. So I wanted to ask you guys, what do you guys think? So this brings us to our first poll question. Was Sue a hunter, a scavenger, both, or as oftentimes is the case in science, we just don't know, we might need more evidence. And while you guys answer that poll, I'll just show you a couple of other cool fossils from T-Rex that I've been fortunate enough to find. Here's a nice claw of a T-Rex. You can see this claw was likely used for tearing into flesh, just like these big old teeth were used to crush through bones. And in fact, at several of my dinosaur localities, I found shed teeth like this. So you can see here, this is a shed tooth that I found with some duck-billed dinosaur ribs. So this T-Rex was chewing on some duck-billed dinosaur ribs and then lost its tooth. And 67 million years later, I was fortunate enough to find it. So
should we take a look at those results, Tyler?
Let's have a look. I'm really curious to see what everybody thinks.
All right, so it looks like, I don't know who made this bar graph in Zoom, what robot is doing that, but it looks like most of the votes were for both. Some people said hunter, some said scavenger, and a couple said, I don't know. And like we said, it's always fine to say, I don't know. Scientists say, I don't know all the time. So what do you think? Did we get it right? Or what does the evidence point toward?
Yeah, so again, we knew they ate meat because of all the, of just their overall anatomy. And it was, we didn't have the data for the longest time. It was sort of just this fight back and forth, hunter, scavenger, hunter, scavenger. But as oftentimes is the case in science and in paleontology, a cool discovery was made. And so a few years ago, some spinal bones or vertebrae, your backbone, some backbone of a duck-billed dinosaur was found. And the spinal bones you can see on the screen there, they were damaged. It was indicated that they were damaged and then they healed. And they CT scanned this fossil, and right where that circle is, they found the tip of a tyrannosaur tooth embedded inside of these vertebrae, and which indicates that this is an example of a duck-billed dinosaur that survived an attack by a T-Rex, which does suggest that T-Rex was an active hunter. But just like all modern large, animals that eat meat, they eat all the meat, right? I mean, they're not really picky. They usually do both. If you think of lions or hyenas, they both actively hunt. And if they're able to chase off and get a free meal from somebody else's kill, they do that as well. So if you were to ask me, my vote would have been both. Sue was both a hunter and a scavenger.
Well, it's like beggars can't be choosers, right? If you're that big, you need to eat that many calories in a day. You got to get your meat from somewhere. And so maybe it's easy enough. Yeah. If somebody else, maybe someone smaller took something down, you can just say, hey, get out of here. I'm a T-Rex. I'm bigger than you. This is my carcass now. So
absolutely.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah. No dinosaur grocery stores in the Cretaceous. You kind of had to come by a meal where you could get one. Now we have another paleontologist on with us today. So Ian, I'm going to invite you to start your camera and we'll bring you on into our gallery of scientists today. And we'll give Tyler a little bit of a break. Now, Ian, you are a paleobotanist, which means that you study fossil plants. And that's pretty important because when you look at a species, or even when you look at a single individual like Sue or like Tyrannosaurus Rex, you need to think a little bit more about the environment that species or that individual lived in. And that's really where your expertise comes in. So what can you tell us about the ecosystem or the environment of the Hell Creek Formation, as it is now, during the Cretaceous? What sort of other living things existed alongside Sue?
Hi, Talia. Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. So I spend a lot of my time as a scientist building up that world around Sioux, and putting in those pieces that sort of build that whole ecosystem so we can understand what it would have been like if you were actually standing there on the same landscape as Sioux herself. So when you go outside and look at the world out your backyard, say the forest behind your house, or you go down to the park, or maybe you travel with your family to one of the national parks around the country. When you go outside and you look, you might be searching for those animals. You might be looking for the coyote or the deer, or maybe even you're a birder, you're looking for the birds, or maybe some amphibians, some frogs, or something like that. But what you really see around you is the forest, the plants. And sometimes we forget that. We're sort of vertebrate oriented, being vertebrates ourselves. We sort of focus in on the vertebrates, but the plants really make that landscape, really make that world around these animals. So I study the plants and try to tell the evolutionary history of the world's forests, how they came to be. And Sioux's world is an important moment in that history. So if we were to transport back to the Cretaceous and found ourselves on the landscape next to Sioux, hopefully we wouldn't encounter Sioux. That would not be so good. But if we saw those forests, we'd see a lot of things that were recognizable and maybe a few things that weren't. So what I want to show you is a few fossils that represent the world around Sioux. Sorry, I'm also, I've been talking all day, so I'm starting to feel it a little bit. So anyway, I want to show you a couple of these cool fossils. So imagine just the ponds that you might see. So in particular, this photo, see in the bottom right there, those little round leaves, those are little lily pads. Some grow up above the water, some float right on it. And here is a fossil lily pad right here. About $1. It's about the size of a large, well, it's a little bit larger than a silver dollar, but the middle part there is where the stem would have stretched down into the water column, and it got trapped in mud and sand. So you can see that this is a rock here, just a flat rock with that beautiful leaf on its surface. And that tells us, of course, that there were not only lily pads, but ponds on a landscape next to Sioux. Here's another example of a tree leaf that fell over a tree that almost certainly itself saw a tyrannosaur. Maybe not Sioux herself, but probably saw a tyrannosaur throughout its life. So this leaf was green in life. It fell off of a tree 67 million years ago and was entombed in sand and mud. Again, you can see it's just on a piece of rock here, and then it's a beautiful imprint. You see the stem, the veins, and all the teeth on that leaf. So these fossils really help us build up the world around Sioux. And they can tell us a couple of really interesting things. So when you look behind me here, you can see these are just drawers and drawers of fossil leaves. And you can see a few in there in all these boxes. In fact, we've got something like 100,000 fossil leaves throughout the collections here at the museum. And we can use those fossil leaves then to say something about that ancient world, that forest in which these dinosaurs lived. You might imagine the difference between, say, the kinds of plants you would find in a jungle like the Amazon, or the kinds of plants that you find in your backyard. You might not be finding huge palm trees and things like that, and giant beds of ferns in the back of your backyard, or maybe you are, depending on where you're living. If you're in the desert, certainly you're not seeing those kinds of things. So the plants tell us a little bit about those landscapes. So we can take all these incredible fossil leaves and then put them back together to say what the world was like. So with that information, we know that Sioux's world was pretty warm and pretty wet, probably. So certainly warmer and wetter than it is here in Colorado. It was probably much more like Florida, maybe Miami, or somewhere in Central America like Costa Rica. And so the leaves tell us that information, give us an idea of what that world was like in which Sioux lived. So I think with that, we'll open it up for a few questions.
That is exactly right. We are ready to take some questions from our on-camera group. So I am going to add Tyler back in. We'll do this as just sort of a gallery style. Who knows which one of our experts will be better suited to answer your question. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with, I think, one question each from each of our on-camera groups. We have 7 of those. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can, because if we get through all of those on-camera questions and we have some extra time, we'll pull some from the chat. If it's time for us to move on, Ian has something else cool to show us after we're done with this first round of questions, and we may come back to those chat questions in just a little bit. Everyone is doing a great job so far of just typing really awesome, scientific, thoughtful questions in the chat. Again, that makes my job a lot easier. It makes it easier for me to find your questions quickly and pull them to ask the experts. To our on-camera schools, I'm going to ask that you all actually turn your cameras off until it is your turn to ask a question, just as a little bit easier for me to make sure I get your video spotlit. And you'll notice that I do have a number assigned to each one of you for your place in the question asking order. So our first group is going to be Miss Byers' group from Bridgeport, Nebraska. It looks like you have 2 connections, so I have you as 1 and 2. So number 1, I'm going to ask you to start your video. And then it looks like you've got it. I'm going to add you into our gallery, bring a student up to the mic. You'll need to unmute and let us know what you want to know.
Okay. Hi, my name is Riata, and my question is, how long does it take to set up like a dinosaur display?
Ooh, good question. Tyler, do you want to take that one? How long did it take? Maybe tell us how long it took to clean out Sue, first of all, and then the process of actually standing a dinosaur skeleton up.
Yeah, so that a good question. So, Sue was discovered in 1990. It took only about 2 weeks to excavate her skeleton. Sometimes it can take up to several years to excavate dinosaur skeletons, depending how much rock is on top of them and how hard that rock is. But with Sue, it took about 2 weeks. But then the real time intensive task occurs, and that's the cleaning of the fossils. Because Sue was buried underneath a lot of rock, and then you have to clean the rock off of the skeleton. And in Sue's case, that took over 30,000 hours. And again, just to put that in perspective, that's one person working a full-time job and doing that for 15 years. So it takes a long time, and it's been estimated with a Triceratops skeleton, it can take up to 20 years just to do the cleaning of a single Triceratops skeleton. So the way around that is to get a lot of people working on cleaning the fossils. The more people you have working on cleaning the fossils, then theoretically, the faster they can be cleaned and be ready for display. But in general, it takes years, several years between finding the dinosaur to cleaning the dinosaur to getting it on display. It's usually in the upwards of a decade, I would say, 10 years at least.
And it takes a lot of people too. It's definitely not just one person doing any of that, the taking it out of the ground, the cleaning the fossils, and then putting it together on a mount.
It takes a small army, that's for sure.
Small army. Good thing so many people want to be paleontologists when they grow up, because we need each and every one of them. All right, we're going to bring in the next classroom from Bridgeport. Bring a student on up to the mic and let's hear what you want to know.
Hi, my name is Brody, and I was wondering, do dinosaurs have rabies or types of sickness that could hurt humans?
Oh, interesting. That's a good question. And we can talk, I know one thing Tyler can tell you a little bit about is we know that Sue was sick with something. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's a good question. Did dinosaurs get sick? And undoubtedly they did. There was a paper published just a couple of months ago, actually, documenting cancer, bone cancer in a dinosaur skeleton, which, very, very sad. But so they could get sick just like humans. Rabies, they wouldn't necessarily get rabies because that's more of a mammalian type sickness. But they definitely were susceptible to all sorts of disease, as was Sue. And so Sue seems to have had an infection in her lower jaw. There are all these little holes and pits on her jaw that suggested that she had a bone infection. So just like modern animals, modern your dog, your pets, they can get sick with different illnesses, and humans as well. So too did these dinosaurs, including Sue.
Good question. I cannot imagine being a dinosaur dentist. We know that humans and dinosaurs did not live at the same time, but maybe that's a good thing, because then someone would have had to learn how to take care of their teeth. That wouldn't have been so good. All right, we're going to move on next to Ms. Walt's group at Edison Elementary School. And it looks like you've got a student ready to ask a question. Tell us what you want to know.
Hi, I'm Elise, and my question is, why are their arms so small?
Why are T-Rex's arms so small? I bet a lot of people are wondering that. Tyler, do you have any ideas for us?
It's a good question. I think, some of the earlier tyrannosaurs, like the relatives of T-Rex, they had much longer arms. And it's just thought that Sue's arms, while they're short, they're incredibly powerful. So Sue's would have been able to bench press a lot of weight. They're really, really robust. But the reason they're small is maybe she just didn't need long arms. Probably relied on chasing prey items down and just reaching down and biting them, versus reaching out with the arms to grab, to take down prey. So a lot of the energy probably of the body was spent elsewhere, including the giant skull, the big teeth, the long legs. Sue had really long legs, and that sort of detracted from the length of her arms. It's a great question.
It really is. Ooh, I went away for a second. There I am. Yeah, the thing about evolution is, if a body is spending a lot of energy to keep up a body part, over generations, it'll kind of shrink, it'll go away if it's not serving a useful purpose. And so most likely Sue just didn't need those big arms to get the prey that they needed to survive. And T-Rex just didn't need to have big arms. Although the idea of T-Rex bench pressing is an amazing visual. And I'm going to be thinking about that for the whole rest of the day. So thank you for that mental picture. We're going to go next to Ms. Jimenez's class at Teller Elementary School here in Colorado. I'm going to add you into our gallery. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Elisa, and my question is, how do they know what colors the dinosaurs were?
Great question. How do we know what colors dinosaurs were? Ian, we haven't called on you yet, so I'm going to have you answer this question.
Sure, that's an awesome question. So we know that they must have been colorful, right? Now, animals are colorful today. And if you've seen a lot of pictures of dinosaurs, sometimes, since we often don't know, we kind of make them just this grayish, brownish color, but they probably have more interesting colors than that, like this one that we helped reconstruct here from Colorado. This is a Torosaurus, and you can see the shield behind its ears or behind its horns, called its frill, is a beautiful red color in this case. So often we don't know, but it turns out there's been some really amazing advances recently. So just in the last handful of years, some scientists have figured out how to take some very tiny little bits of chemical information from beautiful fossils, mostly preserved in China. They're just beautiful fossils that have been preserved in a lake. You can see the feathers of these ancient critters, and those little chemical signatures can give us a couple of different colors. So they can tell us if these things were black and white, and also if they were iridescent. And so it turns out that some of these dinosaurs probably had, well, in fact, probably all of them had incredible colors, but a few we've actually been able to show, yes, they did have incredible color to them. We still don't know what color T-Rex is, or what Sue would have been. So she just kind of gets drawn as a brown animal, but she could have had a lot more color than that. Just like these two Anzu Wileyis that you just saw there, those beautiful dinosaurs with all their colorful feathers.
That's great. Yeah, I saw a question from Hope Bernson's group just a second ago, wondering if it would be possible for a dinosaur to have neon skin like a gecko. And it sounds like maybe yes, which is kind of cool to think about. Yeah, we're all just kind of nodding in agreement, like, yeah, dinosaurs could have totally been neon
Absolutely,
rainbow
they could
colors.
have. Definitely,
That's
no
great.
doubt.
So the next time you see a picture of a dinosaur and they're just all brown and gray or drab and boring, you can just be like, no, I know better. They were neon. That's great. Let's grab another question from Teller, this time from Mr. Gray's class. We're going to add you into our gallery here. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, my name is CJ from Teller Elementary School, and my question is, how do you know the bones belong to Sue?
Oh, good question. So Tyler, tell us about that, because there were other things that were found at Sue's dig site, right? And sometimes when paleontologists make a discovery, there's all kinds of different stuff all jumbled together. So how could you maybe say, I know that these bones belong to this species or this particular individual? How do you figure that out? That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a lot of times when Sue was buried when a big river flooded. And it buried not only Sue, but it buried other animals that had died alongside of Sue, including a little turtle skull. There was a little tiny turtle skull about that big that was found next to Sue. And there was also the skull of a dinosaur like this. This is a big football helmeted dinosaur. You see the big, thick dome skull. So there were a couple of different animals that were buried alongside of Sue. And the way we're able to figure out how they go together is simply by sort of piecing the different bones together. We look at modern day animals like alligators and crocodiles and birds, and we know a lot about how their bones fit together. But then we just take the different bones, like the claw, and then we're able to find the next bone, the toe bone, and sort of just like a Lego set almost, just build up your T-Rex skeleton. So T-Rex, they have a very distinctive morphology. Their body is very different. Be like, just like a human is very different than a dinosaur, which is very different than like a turtle. They're quite distinctive. But then within dinosaurs, it's a little bit trickier. But like a T-Rex skull is quite a bit different than the skull of this particular animal that was also found with Sue. But oftentimes that's quite a puzzle that we have to sort of figure out. How do all of the bones go together? And then to make sure that we're not mixing the skeletons of two animals together to create sort of a Frankenstein-like monster.
That is also a good mental image. So many things to just let the imagination run wild today. Awesome. Yeah, it's a tricky science. Good question. Let's go to Kruger Elementary School down in Texas now. We're going to add you into our gallery. Go ahead and unmute. Let's hear it.
Okay. Why will alligators alive today, but dinosaurs are not?
Oh, good question. I love that one. Ian, I'm going to have you answer that one because I know extinctions and the mass extinction in particular that wiped out the dinosaurs is something you love to talk about. So why do we still see animals like crocodiles, alligators, turtles, things like that, and no T-Rex? What's the difference?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because we know crocodiles and turtles lived alongside T-Rex, but T-Rex didn't make it to the present day. So the end of the time of the dinosaurs came to a close in sort of a fiery cataclysm. There was a giant space rock asteroid that hit Mexico, moving at about 100,000 miles an hour, and it blew this hole in the ground almost 100 miles across, and it sent a shockwave and firestorm around the world in just minutes. And all of these incredible effects of this asteroid impact caused dinosaurs to go extinct and many other things too. But a few things did survive. So then you can start to think about, like, why did a few things survive? And it turns out things like alligators and crocodiles and turtles have pretty slow metabolisms. So they don't need to eat a lot. They can hang out for a long time on a little bit of food. They can have one meal and not eat for a very long period of time. And that time after the asteroid would have been really bad. And if you need to eat all the time, like a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something like that, you'd be in real trouble. So if you survived the asteroid, but there was nothing for you to eat or just a very little bit, you probably weren't going to make it. So those things that can just live at the very lowest level, very slowly, they can live on just little bits of food here and there are the ones that made it. And crocodiles and alligators are two of those kinds of animals, and so are turtles. And there were a few other things that made it as well, but that's probably why they made it and why the dinosaurs didn't make it.
Yeah, they just had different physical body needs, and the dinosaurs just couldn't sustain themselves anymore.
Yeah.
It's interesting how adaptations and being well adapted to your environment can change really quickly if your environment changes. That relates to a question I saw in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this one because I think it's a really good question. I can't remember who asked this one. I'll have to scroll up and find it. But somebody asked if there were animals like cats and dogs alive during the same time as Sue. And so Ian, tell us a little bit about mammals in the Cretaceous, because we know that there were some, and they might not be cats and dogs, but then the mammals changed a lot after that asteroid. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the mammals, our group of animals, we're of course mammals, and mammals dominate landscapes today, with the exception of birds. Birds are not mammals, and they're still very, very speciose today. But mammals we kind of think of as sort of being the dominant group of animals on the planet today. We're a very old group of animals. We stretch way back to the same time when dinosaurs started. In fact, we're probably even a little bit older than dinosaurs. But once dinosaurs evolved, they were so good at what they did they sort of dominated the landscape for 150 million years. So mammals, our group of animals, just lived alongside dinosaurs, but we were small. We're like the size of a house cat and very primitive. Egg laying and marsupials, where you have the little tiny baby that crawls up and then starts to grow inside the pouch. And so those were the kind of mammals that were around. At the end of the time of the dinosaurs, we get hit by this asteroid. Many of the dominant things go extinct, and a few mammals make it through. Many mammals go extinct, but a few make it through because they have some special adaptations and they can just live on maybe very little amounts of food, or they're tiny. It helps to be small to survive these kinds of events. But then there was a world without dinosaurs. They were all gone, and the mammals got their chance. Our group got our chance. And we diversified, and we turned into everything from bats to whales to lions to tigers to humans, right? And we have our origins basically right after the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, don't be too sad that those dinosaurs went extinct, because if it didn't happen, we wouldn't have been here today.
That's
And Tyler and Ian a couple of years ago made a really amazing discovery at a site down in Colorado Springs, so not too far from us. And I know we have some Colorado Springs schools on today. At the Corral Bluff site, they made an amazing discovery about how the Earth started to rebound after that extinction event. You can find more information about that discovery on our website. These two have done lots of talks about it, including one for kids last year that I think you can view on our YouTube channel. So check that one out and learn a little bit more. Okay, our friends in Miss Hansen's group have been waiting so patiently for a chance to ask their questions. So we're going to go ahead and go to them now. We're going to bring them into our gallery. Go ahead and bring a student up to the mic, unmute, and ask us your question, and then we'll move on. And you'll need to unmute.
Hi, my name is Kaden from Keller Elementary, and I would like to know how the fossils stay in the rock so long.
Oh, good question. How do fossils stay in the rock so long? Tyler, let's go back to you for that one.
Sure. Yeah, so it takes a lot of luck for an animal to make it into the fossil record. That's the real trick. But once it's in the fossil record, once it's been buried, it just continues to get buried, and it's pretty much, safe, from erosion and everything else. So, as long as it gets buried, you have a good chance of making it into the fossil record. I think then the next trick of being able to be found is then the fossil that was buried, then it needs to be exposed. It needs to be brought back to the surface of the earth. And that's why here in Colorado, we have such an amazing fossil record, because we have the mountains, right? And so we had all these fossils that were buried over time. They get buried, and then the mountains start forming. And in that process, they bring all of the rock back to the surface. And once that rock is back to the surface, then you have a chance of being able to find those fossils.
Yeah, so most of the time it's just they stay hidden. They get buried and fossilize, and we never see them again. As Ian likes to say, the best fossils are still in the ground, because they don't just come popping out of nowhere. You got to go look for them.
Very
All
wise
right.
word.
Yeah, wise words, immortal words. I feel like I say them all the time because they're just so good. All right, I see one question in the chat that I think is an amazing transition into what we're talking next. And Ian, rather than answer this question, I think we'll just use it as a lead in, and you can maybe talk a little bit after our next poll question about the answer to this question. Somebody, it looks like Hope's group again, wonders, were there cockroaches in the Cretaceous period? And how did they survive if they were there? I know cockroaches have a reputation for being a species that can kind of survive everything. So rather than answer that question, we're going to explore it with another poll. So I'm going to pop that poll up on everybody's screen. Ian has some more stuff to show us, and we want to know, what kind of fossil do you want to see next? Do you want to check out fossil insects like cockroaches? Do you want to take a look at some fossil leaves? Leaves are a really important key in the study of evolution of the Cretaceous period of Sioux's environment. And really, you can't go wrong with either choice, because we're going to show you some cool stuff either way. While we do that poll, Ian, you want to answer that question about cockroaches? Were there cockroaches?
Absolutely. So yes, there were cockroaches, and we have found a few cockroach fossils. Cockroaches are actually older than dinosaurs. They make it all the way back to about 300 million years ago. So if you were transported back into time at any point in the last 300 million years, there's a good chance you'd come across a cockroach. So they are remarkable animals, and yeah, they're right. They're kind of gross, and people don't want them around their house and things like that. But they've been here a lot longer than us, and they'll probably be here a lot longer than we'll be on the planet.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, it sounds like the rumors are true and cockroaches can indeed survive anything. Could my studio producer put me back on the screen? There you go. The button I normally hit to bring myself back on went to sleep for a second. Let's take a look at the results. It was close this time, I guess. Well, no, looks like it wasn't. Fossil insects are still the big winner. They have been in every session today. But the cool thing is that fossil leaves are part of how we show you fossil insects. So, Ian, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about fossil insects and leaves.
Okay, so it turns out it's actually pretty hard to find a fossil insect in any part of the fossil record. There are a few special situations where you might find little lake deposits where you get this really fine-grained material and the insects fall to the bottom of the lake and get preserved. And the other spot is in amber. You probably remember from Jurassic Park, the insect trapped inside the amber. And amber is just fossilized tree sap. And so that tree sap is pouring out of trees, and the insect gets in there and gets trapped. And then that tree sap turns to a rock and preserves the insect. So those are really, really special examples. Most of the time, we don't find insects in the fossil record. So alongside Sue, we knew that there must be tons of insects. Insects should be around. They're buzzing all over the place. There's mosquitoes, there's the cockroaches, all kinds of things like that. But it's interesting. One of the ways we can tell something about which insects were around and what they were doing is by looking at fossil leaves. Many groups of insects actually eat leaves today, right? So think about pests, and we got to put all the pesticides in our garden and on crops to keep the insects away. That's been happening for millions and millions of years. Not the insecticide, but of course the insects eating the plants. So if we can figure out the chew marks on plants, we can say something about the insects. So I'm going to show you a cool fossil right here. This is the fossil leaf that has been chewed by an insect. So you see this beautiful leaf here, and that spot right there, that hole right there, and some chew marks there. That's a leaf that has been chewed by probably something like a grasshopper. And that grasshopper was probably hopping around right next to Sue and then ended up on this leaf and chewed this leaf. And of course, the insect's gone, but we have its evidence of its life in this fossil leaf. So when we look at the leaves around Sue, and at that time period, they're all chewed. They have all kinds of chew marks from all different kinds of insects. And then about 500,000 years later, the asteroid hits and the dinosaurs go extinct. And we look at fossil leaves right after the asteroid impact because the forest came back, right? Even though lots of plants went extinct, some things made it. But if you look at the leaves after the extinction, they're all pristine. Nothing was chewing them. So the insects also experienced a big extinction. We lost a bunch of them as well. So we can say something about insects from the fossil leaves. And in fact, that is the primary way we think about insects in the past, is through the fossil leaf chew marks that they have left.
So it's a little bit of a trick question, because those of you who voted for fossil leaves, you still got to hear a little bit more about them. Either way, we said you couldn't go wrong. Awesome. Now we have just a couple of minutes left in our time together. So I can tell you we're not going to get through every question today, which just means that we pose the challenge to all of you then. If you have a question that doesn't get answered today, your job is to go and see what you can figure out. Maybe you come to the museum and pay us a visit. We do have a cool exhibition about Sue. It's only here for a couple more weeks though, so you better come quick. Take a look on the internet, see what you can find, but we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. So Tyler, let's get you added back into our gallery, and we'll take as many questions as we have in the next couple of minutes. One question that I've seen come up multiple times, and it looks like Courtney Kowalewski's group is the most recent one to ask it. How did Sue die? Could anything besides just like the regular environment kill a T-Rex? Would the asteroid have been the thing that wiped Sue herself out? Or how did Sue meet her end? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so we know that it wasn't the asteroid that killed Sue, because Sue was found about 500,000 to maybe 750,000 years before the extinction of the dinosaurs. We do know that Sue was pretty old. She was 28 years old, which is really old for a Tyrannosaur. It's the oldest known Tyrannosaur. So we also know that Sue had a pretty tough life, because she had, an infection in her lower jaw. She also had some injuries to her lower leg. So she had a bone that was broken and then healed over. So she lived a nice, full, and no doubt adventuresome life. But we don't really know how she died. Very well could have been from old age, because 28 is really old for a Tyrannosaur. So that's most likely how she died.
It always makes me laugh because 28 is not that old for a human. And as someone who's older than 28, I'm always a little bit like, hey, what? That's old? Okay, I guess so. Awesome. The number one question I think we've seen come in today, and I think a lot of people are cluing into this. We keep calling Sue she. Do we know if Sue was a male dinosaur or a female dinosaur? Have we figured that out?
We haven't. So I keep on referring to her as she, simply because Sue, it was found by Sue Hendrickson, a woman. And so that's the name that was given to this magnificent dinosaur. And a lot of scientists have looked at to try to determine the sex, whether Sue was a boy or whether Sue was a girl, but we just don't have any solid evidence for one hypothesis over the other. So right now we just can't say.
The cool thing though about finding a dinosaur, especially if it's a new species or a particular specimen, and really identifying a new species of any kind, extinct or extant, which means still alive, is you get to be part of the naming process. So all of you out there who are like, I think I want to find a dinosaur someday. Yeah, that's just one extra perk. If you find something really special, you might get to give it a name. All right, with that, it is just about time for us to say goodbye, but real quick, Tyler and Ian, I have to ask you this one. I don't think anyone's asked you this yet today. What's your favorite dinosaur? Ian, we'll have you go first.
Okay, my favorite dinosaur is an animal called Parasaurolophus, and it's a duck-billed dinosaur, but it has a huge crest out of the back of its head. It's basically its nose grew up over its head and out of the back of its head, about 6 feet out of the back of its head. And it probably made these amazing trumpeting sounds on the landscape. Maybe you could hear it from miles and miles away, a herd of Parasaurolophus coming your way.
They do move in herds. All right, Tyler, yours too. What's your favorite?
I love that. Parasaurolophus is a cool dinosaur, but for me, it's these big football helmeted dinosaurs. And I have a part of a skull right here. These are the big dome headed dinosaurs, the Pachycephalosaurus or Stygimoloch. Sometimes these domes could be up to a foot thick. So you talk about a thick-headed dinosaur. This is it right here. And so Pachycephalosaurs are my favorite type of dinosaur.
That's awesome. Somehow I think nobody had managed to ask you that question yet today, so I had to do it. All right, everyone, that is all the time we have, but we hope you'll join us next time for some more exciting Scientists in Action fun. Our last broadcast of the year is on May 6th. That's a Thursday. We're looking at imaging the ancient world. So the role of technology in paleontology and how things like CT scanning and 3D printing can help us sort of study ecosystems and creatures long gone. So make sure you tune in for that one. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. On-camera groups, please feel free to unmute your microphone and say goodbye. Tyler and Ian, thank you so much for a great day. Super fun conversation, such amazing questions and great answers too. Thanks for being here, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.